Text messaging. Hey, we all know text messaging takes place. Many of us are involved in sending text messages. But text messages, how do they come into evidence? Do they even come into evidence? Well, that takes us to this week's case. Involves, again, real people, real situation. Man who is accused of kidnapping and sexually molesting a woman in Nevada. Well, case went forward, and as part of the case, the prosecutor introduced 10 text messages. And of those 10 text messages, he said these originated with the defendant. He wrote these, and it demonstrates that, in fact, he was involved in this crime. Well, the defendant jumped up and said, no, you can't bring in those text messages because there's no indication I wrote them. How do you know that they originated with me? You haven't given any evidence that they originated with me, and therefore they shouldn't come in as evidence. They need to be authenticated. Well, what does it mean to be authenticated? It means that it, in fact, originated with the person. You may have seen many movies in which, in the old days, we had handwriting experts, still appear, who show up and say, well, yes, that handwriting, in fact, was written by Joe Smith, and yes, I can tell it's his handwriting, and this note that states X, Y, and Z was written by Joe Smith. Or may have heard the evidence regarding a typewritten note. Hey, I can tell you, an expert will say, that that came from a specific typewriter because, oh, look at here, the O is slightly defective because of the way it's been used so much, and therefore that impression is different than an impression made by any other typewriter. We know that, and I can tell you that that typewritten note originated with that specific typewriter. Okay, so you get that kind of evidence. But in the world of text messaging, what kind of evidence can you have? I mean, these text messages just flow out there through the ether. How do we know who actually wrote the text message? Well, one of the circumstantial bits of evidence is who owned the phone. Did they have custody of it? Did they have control of it? And all of that can go to demonstrating who actually wrote the text message. And we need to know who wrote that message if we're going to use that evidence against that person. Well, in this particular instance, the guy was convicted, and the case went up to the Nevada Supreme Court. There, the Nevada Supreme Court looked at this, and they listened to the arguments, and they came away saying, you know what, defendant, you are right. You are right. In this case, the prosecutor did not introduce sufficient evidence to indicate where those text messages originated. Therefore, since there isn't sufficient evidence, the text messages don't come in. Now, as to what happened on the case, the court said, well, that's true for 8 of the messages, but as to 2 of the messages of the 10, those come in because there was circumstantial evidence. What kind of circumstantial evidence? Well, a number of things. First of all, we know the phone had been basically registered to the gal who had been kidnapped. We know that he, the defendant, took the phone. We know that he had possession of it. She could testify when he had possession of it. She could testify as to whether she saw him actually texting. So a variety of bits of evidence that could come in that would demonstrate that he, in fact, wrote those text messages. As to 2 of those messages, the court said sufficient evidence. As to 8 of them, they go out. But you know what? The court said, we don't care, because at the end of the day, those 2 messages combined with the other evidence was sufficient evidence to convict him. Therefore, even though those 8 shouldn't have come in, the 2 did, and they were sufficient combined with the other evidence. So what do we learn from this? What do we learn from this? What we learn from this is that today in the 21st century, just as in the 20th century, the 19th century, writings to come in, whether they're text messages, whether a handwritten note, whether a typewritten note, whether a word processing note, in order to show that those notes, that those words came from the person who's either accused or who it's being attributed to, it is necessary to demonstrate and authenticate those writings to show that they in fact were written by that person. Does this seem fair? Of course it seems fair. If you're going to be accused of something, wouldn't you like to know that the evidence used against you is in fact authentic evidence? All right. We bring you this case as we bring you cases every week, so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.